Hey guys, sorry I couldn't be there today. I'm really missing seeing you guys for one last time before the semester ends. Jenny too. So when you guys go out to dinner, have a round of drinks on me. Well, not on me. I'm not going to pay for it. Just have a round of drinks and then think about me or something. Anyway, here we go. So implementing an effective advisory program after a school merger. Jenny said not to have too fancy of a title, so I really brought it down here. So here's the roadmap. The Academy of Science and Innovation, where I work, we're a 612 magnet school that was recently created after two smaller schools merged called Medical Prep and Two Rivers. During that transition, the new administrative team instituted two new programs to try and bolster school culture. They were called Innovation and Advisory, and both took place within the regular school hours. Innovation and Advisory had been operating for 7 months so far when I started my evaluation, but not much data had been collected to determine if these programs have actually done anything to our school culture. Now, we know that school culture is especially important for any school, but even more so after two schools merged. I looked at a bunch of different research articles, and and all of those articles said that as soon as schools merge or two different groups come together, you really need to make a big effort to try and manage the culture of those groups so that they don't clash and that they work together. So for this presentation, I'm going to begin by introducing a framework to conceptualize school culture and talk about the possible purposes an advisory program can have. And that framework is from three people, Glassy, Gullidge, and Cox from 1997. It turns out at the end of this, I found out that the innovation program that we have is not at all appropriate for the needs of ASI. In fact, not quite sure why we have it. And the advisory program is appropriate. It's a good idea, but the way that's implemented right now is not very effective. So let's jump right in to the school merger that happened at the beginning of this year. So we have two schools. We have MedPrep, MPTPA, and Two Rivers, or TRMHS. Now, MedPrep had about 450 students, 6 through 12, and it's had a lot of turnover. It's had 4 principals in 4 years. And so it's had one that was there for a while that left. It had one that ended up being let go for cause. It had an interim principal, and then now the new principal, Mr. McCain. Now they're housed in a new building, which is partially why the schools merged. Two Rivers is where I came from. We had 300 students in grades 9 through 12. We've had steady leadership for the past 5 years, but we haven't had a real building. We've been broken into 2 incubator campuses in Hartford, one in the Learning Corridor, and one in the Colt building you can see off 91. And so when there was an issue with budget and it turned out Two Rivers was not going to get a new building, they saw, steady leadership in Two Rivers, a new building with MedPrep, let's put those together and create one school. And that's the Academy of Science and Innovation. So ASI has 770 students, and now we're 6 through 12. We're about 45% Latino, 28% Black, and 19% white, and about 5% Asian. Just over half of our kids from Hartford. Ooh, look at that. We're editing on the fly here. Hartford, there we go. And a little more than half of our kids have free and reduced lunch. Although interestingly, we subsidize all of our kids to have 100% free lunch at school. Now, half of the teachers at our school currently at ASI come from MedPrep, and the other half came from Two Rivers. I know there were some layoffs that contributed to that to pare the staff down, and unfortunately, we're going through actually another round this year. And so far, we've had a new innovation and advisory program. Medical Prep had an advisory program, but it was inconsistent. Some years they would do an enrichment program, some years they would kind of have a rapport building, some years they would run their math and English intervention during advisory, and that changed literally every year, mostly because of the different administrators. Two Rivers had an advisory program with a different focus every day of the week. So, for example, Monday was about executive functioning and organization. Wednesdays were about social emotional learning. Tuesdays and Thursdays were about checking in with grades and goal setting. And Fridays were kind of a fun challenge day. But we've done that for the past few years. But coming into ASI, they decided to shake things up a little bit, scrap any old program, and start a new innovation and a new advisory program. So what does this actually look like? Well, before we get there, let's talk about the theory of action that the administrators had coming in. They believed that if a student feel a sense of belonging in their school and can become involved in school culture, like sports and clubs, then students will feel comfortable in their school and have positive social interactions and higher levels of achievement. Their thinking was, we've got these two schools coming together. We need to get kids involved. We need to get clubs, sports going. We need to get kids mixing together, doing things they're passionate about. So they started innovation. Now, innovation is a 30-minute daily period happening Monday through Thursday, so 4 days a week. During that time, teachers chose an extracurricular activity to run. So it could be something like basketball, watching Disney movies. One teacher did like a zombie apocalypse scenario where the kids were like planning for a zombie apocalypse, I guess, anything. And then students signed up for those with a purpose of enrichment, right? And a little bit of focus on advocacy and community, and we'll come back to those words later. On the other hand, advisory was just once a week, every Friday for 30 minutes, the same time slot. Again, hold on. Doing stuff on the fly here. Okay, Friday, capital F. And advisory had pre-prepared lessons created by counselors, psychologists, or our PBIS coaches with a purpose or focus on respect, kindness, and social emotional skill building. So all that kind of stuff was supposed to happen here. Unfortunately, there was no training for advisory. Each session was distributed via email, and the student support team really just rotated on who was going to plan each week. So one Friday the counselors did something, one Friday the school psychologist did something, another day was the social worker, another day was PBIS. So they didn't really talk about what they're going to do each time, so it's kind of a one-shot deal each time. We'll see how that plays out in a minute. So in these programs, we've got some stakeholders, and here you have a stakeholder. Took me a while to find that, so We've got teachers. Now the teachers design and implement the innovation program, that kind of extracurricular activity, but only implemented advisory. So they implemented it, but it was really the school and support staff that designed that advisory program that we have. Students, most important stakeholder here, got to choose their innovation, but were randomly placed into advisory classes. And we're going to dive a little more into students' role in this a little bit later, but know that they're the biggest stakeholder. And then parents. Parents want their students to succeed, but in this current format, they're really untapped assets. Advisory and innovation didn't really use parents in any particular way. So before I show you the data that I found on innovation and advisory and talk about what we can do with them, I want to introduce a framework here. Now, this is the framework that was originally, I mentioned at the beginning, from that trio, Glassy, Gullidge, and Cox from 1997. And basically what they said is every advisory can be broken down into one of these purposes. Either you have an advocacy advisory, and that's really for student to adult relationships. You have a community advisory, where you're building student to student relationships, peer relationships. You have a skill advisory, where you're talking about self-management, decision-making skills. Your social emotional stuff goes in here. Your executive functioning could go in here. That kind of the soft skill building. You can have an enrichment advisory, where students are doing kind of extracurriculars, things like that. You can have an academic advisory that addresses the educational needs, maybe provide some sort of intervention, math, English, whatnot. You can have an administrative advisory, really that's just passing out papers, communicating school information, announcements, things like that. And lastly, a break, which is one that I've added. In fact, I added enrichment and break. And a break advisory is one where literally students kind of take a break from the stress of the school day by listening to music, walking around the room, or sleeping. And that was not in the original framework, but we'll see why that's important in a minute. So I think one of the most important things to look at when considering social, emotional well-being of a school, or culture in general, I should say, is to look at the Culture and Climate Survey. And so here we have the Culture and Climate Survey for not for ASI, but for Two Rivers and MedPrep. That's been combined and weighted appropriately. So this represents those two schools the year before they came together. Now, I don't actually have the recent data for ASI, because even though ASI takes a Culture and Climate Survey in November and December, the results are not released until, May? So what's that, like 6 months later? So we'll talk about that later and why that's an issue. But for now, we've got this data from the previous years. So basically, this is a bar graph of the percent of students and parents. I'm sorry, students and staff. Ugh, a mess here. Percent of students and staff that responded positively to constructs on the 2015-2016 Culture and Climate Survey. So we've got a number of questions that were asked of students and staff, and they responded if they agree, disagree, neutral to them. And so these are the percentages in each of those categories of questions or statements that people responded agree or strongly agree to. So if you look here, there's two things to notice that I notice at least. First off, staff generally respond much more positively than the students, right? In every single category, right? Especially school connectedness, right? Social learning, support for learning, academics, there's a big gap between students and staff. So maybe there's some sort of disconnect. Maybe staff don't really understand how students are feeling. But more importantly, look at this. Social emotional security. Less than 20% of students reported they agree that they feel socially and emotionally secure in the school. That's things like being bullied. That's things like feeling like they can take risks with their peer groups and talk to new people. And also social learning. Those were questions like, do you learn about how to interact with your peers? Do you learn how to make good decisions? Do you learn how to organize your time effectively? Things like that. And those are both very low. You know, think about this. Less than 20% of kids responded positively to social emotional security. Yikes. So remember, 4 days a week, we as a staff spend time on innovation, which focuses not on skills, but on enrichment, school connectedness, which is actually one of the higher ones. I mean, you know, it's basically hitting 50%, but it's one of the higher ones here. And in fact, it makes even less sense when you think about this. Here are two pie charts of the extracurricular activity students were involved in, or reported they were involved in, at NPTPA and TRMHS before the merger. And if you look, actually, every single student at NPTPA reported they were involved in something, and about 3/4 of students at Two Rivers reported they were involved in something. So actually, we don't really have a problem with involvement, it seems. So perhaps an enrichment advisory is not the best route. So we have some unintended consequences when we try and implement an enrichment kind of advisory, and here they are. Essentially, we have a complete lack of fidelity in innovation. Now, I gave a survey asking teachers, you know, what's the purpose of innovation and advisory, and you know, are you doing innovation and advisory? And 85% of teachers said they understood the purpose of innovation, and a little more than half said they were actually doing it. But that wasn't my experience. So I actually took 2 hours and walked around to every single innovation period in the entire school, all 58 of them, I believe. And I scored them whether they were fully participating in an activity, and full participation meant at least half of kids and the teacher were doing some sort of extracurricular activity. Partial participation, meaning the teacher was trying, some students were into it, and no participation, which means no one was doing anything related to extracurriculars, or, you know, sports, clubs, nothing. Look at this. 37 of those 58 had no participation. Only 10 had half or more of the students actually participating in something. And those tended to be things like, you know, playing basketball in the gym or watching a movie. You know, the Zombie Apocalypse Club did not survive. They were just kind of sitting, napping, really turned into that break kind of advisory that I mentioned before. Now, there's an even worse unintended consequence that happened because of innovation. This is a graph of the skipping referrals per hour at our school during the various blocks. We run a block schedule for a day with innovation and lunch in the middle. And if you look here, innovation ends up having 5.5 times more skipping referrals to the office than the most other skipped block, which is block 4. In that half an hour, there were so many skips that the office was inundated and students were just wandering around the halls. And this is some concrete data that shows that. So, okay, if an enrichment style advisory is not, or enrichment style advisory innovation is not what we're going for, what should we be doing? Well, we can dive a little deeper into that culture and climate survey I brought up before. These statements, students tended to respond most negatively to. Here they are. There are groups of students in my school who exclude others and make them feel bad for not being a part of the group. I've seen others insulted, teased, or otherwise verbally abused more than once by other students in my school. And in my school, adults teach me how to express emotions in proper ways. Right? Very few students agreed with this last comment, and very few students disagreed with these first two, indicating that perhaps we have an issue, a bigger issue, with social emotional security and learning in our school. Um, and we should focus more on a skill-based intervention. So the surface issues we've talked about are high levels of skipping and other discipline issues, and a low level of fidelity with both the innovation and the advisory program. Very few students are in class, and very few teachers are really trying to do anything with them. The root causes, though, are a disconnect between student and teacher perceptions, right? On that survey, you saw a big gap between student and teacher responses. And remember, it was teachers, administrators, and student support staff that decided to implement an innovation program that the school clearly didn't need. There's a low level of social emotional safety and a low level of social learning going on in our school currently. So there's some long-term things we need to do, but here's some immediate actions that I thought of. We need to stop doing innovation as quickly as possible. Um, in my paper, I talked about, in fact, it may be doing more harm than good, right? Students out in the hallways, skipping leads to further progressive discipline issues that don't need to happen. So students may be getting suspended when they don't need to. When things are going around unsupervised in a school with already low social emotional security, negative things can happen. Bullying can happen. Exclusion can happen. So we need to stop that immediately and switch back to a advisory program every day, right? And Two Rivers had a consistent advisory program. Now, it wasn't the best, but the materials are already created. We have a plan for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And there's a thing at our school called House Cup that would integrate nicely into kind of like a fun Friday kind of challenge. But we need to just stop and go straight back to this. No work we need to be done. The file's already there. I talked to our advisory coordinator from last year, our social worker. She's got everything. We should just stop and do this now. And we should also begin hallway sweeps during advisory periods to try and curb all that skipping, get kids back into the classroom. Because at this point, with a quarter left of the year, training and starting a whole new program is going to be very difficult, right? But we can at least curb some of the surface level issues. In the future, we need to, again, take away that innovation period and either implement a daily structured social emotional learning program during advisory and allocate time for teachers to be trained monthly. So something where the student support staff doesn't have to come up with something every week and it's all disjointed. It's something where it's planned out, either created or purchased, but ahead of time, and there's training. Or perhaps we can implement a seminar-style social emotional learning class for 6th grade, 9th grade, and select other groups of students to be taught by one teacher. I talked to the coordinator of advisory at MedPrep, and she said that of the 5 or 6 different advisors they've had, the best is when it's run as a seminar by one teacher that is trained in how to really build social emotional skills with their students. In addition, we need to close that disconnect between students and teachers. One way to do that might be to develop a culture and climate survey that can be given more often, has a shorter turnaround time, and can reveal specific groups of students with low levels of social emotional security. One of these that I found is called the Panorama Survey. Basically, you give it as often as you want. You can customize it to only focus on certain aspects of school culture. And so you can really use it as a dipstick to tell, okay, where are our kids at? And are there any students that are really feeling high levels of bullying, perhaps, and target them and see what's going on. We should allow the student support team to meet monthly to use survey data to drive advisory lessons and target specific students for interventions. Like I mentioned, when it's all disjointed, not much can get done. We need to include parents and other stakeholders as assets in these programs to create events to boost social emotional safety and learning outside of the school. One thing that they're talking about is like a walk to eliminate the hate, and parents can be involved in running that outside of the school. In addition, we're looking into a Big Brothers Big Sisters virtual student mentorship program where people from the Big Brothers Big Sisters program actually video chat with some of our 9th graders and talk about the issues they're having in school and positive ways to resolve them. And that can be part of innovation, and we can also use parents perhaps in that role as well. So bringing the outside in. And lastly, allowing the school leadership team to review the culture and climate survey data along with all other available data to monitor and modify school climate structures on a monthly basis. We can't wait 6 months to see the data and go from there. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you were frustrated over the background puns, like the stakeholder and the root thing and the steps, I don't know, right? You can email me. My email is mr.janes.math@gmail.com. I guess you could just complain to me in the group chat. Whatever you want to do. Have a great rest of the night. Sorry that it took 20 minutes, but at least you can ask me questions. So there's that. Take care, guys.